Thanks, Venkat. And for those who were here yesterday, a bit of a repetition, but I'll try and make it short today so we have more time for your talk, sir, and for the question and answers after. Professor Ganesh N. Devy is a recipient of the second Obaid Siddiqi Chair in the History and Culture of Science at the Archives at NCBS. A renowned literary scholar, historian, social and cultural activist, he's perhaps best known for establishing the People's Linguistic Survey of India. In addition to the PLSI, Professor Devy founded the Adivasi Academy and the Bhasha Research and Publication Center, an organization dedicated to studying and conserving Indian languages. We heard yesterday about how many Indian languages there are and how we are losing them. So this effort is really critical and a really critical part of our future. And apart from studying and conserving Indian languages, Bhasha aims to champion tribal art and literature, and it also aims to uplift Adivasi communities through educational and financial assistance. So during his time at NCBS, he's been involved in work on prehistory and history of Indian civilization from a linguistic perspective, dating back to 12,000 years ago. He has a book that is being launched, coming out soon at the Bangalore International, through an event at the Bangalore International Center. He ran a very exciting course at NCBS on the people of India, and he is today delivering the second lecture in the Obaid Siddiqi Chair lecture series. So basically, in the second half of their tenure, the Obaid Siddiqi Chair delivers a set of lectures, and we are delighted that we are hearing today the second of Professor Devy's 3 lectures at Mount Carmel College on India as a linguistic civilization, with a focus on heritage, which we had heard about yesterday. And today we're going to hear about diversity and future is tomorrow. So without further ado, Professor Devy.
Professor Mayor, Professor Uma, Professor Venkat, all faculty members, students and friends. Coming to this campus this afternoon, I was received with so many smiles that I became slightly afraid that I was getting used to you as friends rather too soon. And if you keep smiling when I come here, the danger is I might continue to come and keep bothering you with my lectures. So don't do that. Thank you for being so friendly, so nice to me. Overwhelming friendship, hospitality and interest. Yesterday when I stopped my lecture, there was a very clever, very brilliant student of political science who came to me and asked a question. I don't know if she is here. Of course, I know each one of you is a brilliant student, but that's true. I don't know if she's here. Otherwise, I would ask her to come and ask that question again when you begin asking questions this afternoon. It was a question related to Sanskrit and Prakrit and established discourse and so on. But I'll not get into Sanskrit and Prakrit just now. Coming to this campus, I'm reminded of my own college days, university days. Some 50 years back, I decided to go to England to study. And the landlady was from Yorkshire, which means she had not traveled much outside that little area. She said to me, "Oh, you speak Indian?" I said, "Of course, I speak Indian languages." She said, "But so many people, do they all speak Indian?" I said, "Yes, of course, but let me tell you a story." And so I told her a story as a student, and I thought I'll begin this afternoon with that story. The story is of the year 1601, 422 years old. A man called Sir Thomas Roe landed in India. He was part of a company established by 5 persons or 6 persons. Everybody had put in some pennies, or maybe half a pound, some shillings, and with a capital of about 6 or 7 pounds, they established a company called the East India Company. These 6 were supposed to receive the profits that the company would eventually make. So when the profit had to be factored among these 6, each one would get a factor. So each one was called a factor. But this was a factor, and Sir Thomas Roe was a factor who wanted to start a factory in Surat. And that's the etymology of the term factory, that's why I'm explaining it. In fact, a factory has nothing to do with facts. All that it has to do with is profit. Sir Thomas Roe in Surat, 1601. Now there was a big problem because none of these Suratis people, none of the persons from Surat knew any English. I mean, even today they don't know enough English actually. And Thomas Roe had no sense of Gujarati. So how do they get into business? They came up with a brilliant idea. The idea was to hire translators. Thomas Roe hired a Portuguese-speaking person who understood English or some English, but also understood the language of Armenia, the Armenic language. The Surtis hired a Persian-speaking who understood some Armenic. So, a sentence was said in English, translated into Portuguese, then to Armenic, then to Persian, then to Gujarati. And a response was given in Gujarati, and then you count all those steps. The result was that the application that Thomas Roe put in for starting East India Company took some 17 years for getting approved by Jahangir. And whenever you go to Ajmer, go to that famous tower, where Jahangir used to give audience to people who came to see him, meet him, sitting on the 3rd floor, like this level, and the visitors stood in the courtyard of that tower and spoke. So I imagine Thomas Roe looking up, his Portuguese translator on the 1st floor, his Persian translator on the 2nd floor. Obviously 16 years to set up East India Company. I told this story to my landlady in Yorkshire. I said, we Indians speak Indian, language called Indian, by which we mean that we are extremely comfortable with Dubhashis, translators. We are extremely comfortable amidst many languages. We are comfortable amidst language uncertainty. When Shakespeare had to be praised by John Keats, and students of literature would know this, Keats used a very famous phrase. He said Shakespeare was great because he was capable of remaining amidst uncertainties. Language uncertainty does not shock us. And these translators, Dubhashis, in fact, Dubhashi was a profession in India, not just in the 17th century, but way beyond that, for centuries before that, Dubhashis became a profession. Occasionally I said that we Indians have a translating consciousness, but I'll not get into that just now. I said it because lots of new cultural movements that started in India started with translations. In Marathi, the first major literary work is by Jnaneshwar, or Gyaneshwar as you call it. And that was a translation of the Bhagavad Gita, the Jnaneshwari, in Gujarat, and that was the end of the 13th century. For Gujarati, one of my mother tongues, the first major writer was a man called Hemachandracharya, a Jain thinker, a Jain scholar. Among the most important things that he did in his life was to compile a dictionary of many languages, which he called the Desi Nama Mala. Mala is compilation of a book, and he was giving Prakrut words, Sanskrit words, the Gujarati which was emerging on the shoulders of Prakrut, Western Prakrut. He was giving those words. For him, that was a natural status of language. Having many languages was a natural being, social being, cultural being for a scholar of that time in the 11th century. But I can go on giving these examples in Tamil, in Kannada, in Telugu, in practically every language. Translations or bilingual works have initiated our great cultural and social movements. I mean, these people, the Jnaneshwars of that time, the heads who, the persons who gave rise to different sects to ask questions, difficult questions, they were bilinguals. Your Basveshwar in Karnataka knew Sanskrit well and knew Kannada equally well. Translating consciousness, the ability to remain amidst linguistic uncertainty and multilingualism. This is what makes our society what it is. I give examples from the 11th and 12th century, but I mentioned Basveshwar. But let me go a little further deep in history for now, and then I'll return very soon to where we are in our time. We all think of Panini as the greatest grammarian in the world. How many times you heard Panini was the greatest grammarian known to the world? The fact is, Panini did not write a grammar of a language. He wrote a treatise on a grammatical framework for many languages. It wasn't a grammar of a language, but it was a method of decoding language, splitting it up, classifying it, and organizing it in hierarchies that Panini had proposed for understanding the relationship between swara, dhvani, and artha, that is the phonetic body of a word and the semantic substance of the word. When he was asked, but which of these is the standard language? Which of these is standard Sanskrit? He had a fantastic response. Panini wrote not just the Ashtadhyayi, the 8 chapters of his grammar book, but he also wrote a book. He composed a text about how to understand these 8 chapters, Ashtadhyayi, and that was called Sutra Part. In the Sutra Part of Panini, there's a conversation, as in Platonic dialogue or in Gandhi's Hind Swaraj or Bhagavad Gita, 2 characters presenting different views. So in Sutra Part, the questioner asks, how do you know which is pure language, standard language? What is Upadishta? Upadishta is pure language. The answer given is, well, of course we know what pure language is, what standard language is. It is the language that the gentle folks speak. Upadishta is that which the Shishtas speak, the highbrow speak, or the Bhadralokas, if any Bengali speaker is here. Bhadraloka is a very pleasing term for some Banglas. Upadishta is what the Shishtas speak. Then the next question is, but who are these Shishtas? So Panini answers, those who speak Upadishta are Shishtas. So this, it goes in a circle, which means, in other words, Panini was saying there is nothing like a standard language. What we have is language as a flow. And that idea of language as a flow remained in Indian philosophy for a very long time as the most respected idea of language. Not language as matter, but language as a process, a never ceasing process, unending flow. This idea repeats in another philosophical text on language some 7 centuries after Panini in Bhartrhari. Bhartrhari was asked, how do we understand? How does meaning happen? I mean, here are words, here are some consonants, phonemes, some vowels, you're making some sounds. How does meaning happen? In a text called Vakya Padiya, Bhartrhari said, look here, don't imagine that don't imagine that there is something called meaning. That would be a delusion. That would be deceiving yourself. What really happens is, and this is what I'm only quoting Bhartrhari from his Vakya Padiya, he says, imagine a stream, a non-stop flowing, flowing stream, and you hold an object over it. You see a reflection. Remove the object, and the reflection has gone. The moment you utter a word, in the stream of the semantic being, and Bhartrhari described that semantic core, the semantic process, as an all-enveloping process. For him, it was the universe. In that flow, images appear, and you can see the image. The meaning is the image that you can see, you can grasp it. But please remember, the moment you finish speaking the word has gone. I had taken a pause. 4 seconds ago, I was making some words. Those words are not there. But when I was making those words, you knew what, or more or less you knew that those words had some meaning. Some of you might find them meaningless, that's another thing. But your mind struggled to figure out what the meaning is. The moment those words are gone, that meaning is gone. Almost like, if you are reading Shakespeare, the last sentence in one of the greatest tragedies, all the rest is silence. Bhartrhari described meaning as reflections in the core of a semantic flow, but ultimately you are bound with silence. I'm giving these examples to bring home the point that language was pursued very differently by people. And there was a much closer affinity between language or understanding of language and metaphysics. There was a much closer affinity between understanding of language and physics, the cosmos, the universe, the reality that we think is reality. Language was at the center of transactions in this country, but language was never seen as any substance. It was always seen as fluid, as a process, as malleable, permeable, porous, and therefore flow from one language into another language was not a mental shock, a cultural shock, a social shock. Some of you have seen, movies based on My Fair Lady of Bernard Shaw. And there, a higher class speaking one kind of language, other people speaking some different language, and therefore that domination allows people to segregate. That was not how Indian mind, I'm using this term slightly cautiously, because if I push myself a little further, I might easily collapse into essentialism of Hindutva, and I don't want to do that. But the core of India's being, India, was differently constructed. The architecture was different, and language and understanding of language had a central role to play in that. Of course, I'm aware that in the Bible it is said that the Word created the world, and so it is said in the Upanishads that the Word creates the world. And at that level, the philosophies are similar, but closer to the ground, the understanding of language, appreciation of language, thread pursuit of a language, or love for a language of different order. I'll give some other examples. Yesterday, this student asked me a question about Prakrit and Sanskrit, and she said, "But isn't everything in Sanskrit, and why do you say Prakrit?" I began this afternoon with a little story, and in India we're extremely fond of stories. When a calamity befalls anyone, all the friends and relatives start telling their own stories to the person to make that person feel a little worse or better. Because we are the story people. For us, life and death is a kind of a story. So, the story. Now, the ultimate story in Indian tradition is called Katha Sarit Sagar. Katha is story. Sagar is the ocean made of many streams of stories. That is the home, that is the mother of all stories, all narratives in India emanate from there. There is no story ever told in India which does not belong to Katha Sarit Sagar in one or the other form. The story of Katha Sarit Sagar itself is very instructive. I asked this question to students: do you mind if I tell you another story? Okay, nobody is saying, vehemently saying, you don't mind. All right, thank you. Shiva was a very, no offense to anybody's sentiment. Shiva was somewhat irresponsible towards Parvati, because he used to go out to help others, human beings, and wander here, there, everywhere. So Parvati is very upset. This is story I am telling from Katha Sarit Sagar. She says, you do everything for everybody, but nothing for me. So Shiva says, what can I do? Parvati says, you tell stories to everybody, why don't you tell a story to me? So he agrees. She says, when you tell that story to me, nobody else will be allowed to be allowed to be present there, overhear what you are telling. So they construct a little hut somewhere in the Himalayas, and she starts telling this story. And because it is known to two of the Ganas, that is an entity between the gods and the humans, they put their ears, and the human tendency, one is always interested in what cannot be heard clearly more than what can be heard clearly. So with their ears they start. Parvati becomes aware that somebody is listening to this, and she opens the door and pulls them in by the long hair they have and curses them. She says, you shall now go and be born, in some different category and suffer, and you will not remember a word of what you heard, because you will not even remember this language. They plead with her. They say, because it is God's story, we were interested, please give us some reprieve, some remission, some concession. Grace mark se pass karo. They go, and they live in a forest. They have forgotten this language. But because they spent enough time in that forest, this remission, the concession given by Parvati, starts working. And they slowly start recalling word after word after word. And the force of it and the excitement of it so much, they want to write it immediately. But in that forest there is no ink or pen. So they pull an animal, bleed it, take some trunk of or branch of it, and start putting using that blood, start writing on tree bark or whatever material, I don't know, that is not mentioned in the story. After some time, when these stories are there, they go to the nearest king, hoping for a good reward. The king says, you have written this in Paishachik language with animal blood. I have none of this. So they go back disappointed, start burning what they have written. And the last minute before burning the tree bark, they decide to read out what they are going to burn. The birds and the animals, enamored of the stories, come close and start listening. And they forget how to eat, how to sleep, the birds and the animals. Because of that, the king starts getting terribly weakened birds and animals for his food in his lunch and dinner. And so he finds out, he is told that somebody in the forest is reading these stories. He rushes there, and out of this fire in which they, to which they are consigning page after page after page of what they have written, he saves some of those. The half-burnt stories recovered by that king became the Brahat Katha, which is the home of all Indian stories. The point I wanted to bring across to you is, there is the mention of Sanskrit, there is the mention of Paishachik language, there is the mention of this king who does not speak Sanskrit nor Paishachik language, but a third language. In the story of all stories, 3 languages are embedded in India. And therefore, no story in India is guaranteed with origin in a single language. Yesterday I mentioned the example of the Mahabharata having many languages in one's consciousness, allowing translation to happen in the mind as a natural linguistic activity, the ability to remain amidst linguistic uncertainty, not getting shocked by when we listen to many languages. All these form the mental habits of Indians for centuries. Those who came here from other continents always felt very amazed, very intrigued, very surprised by what they saw. For instance, Ibn Battuta came here, and he knew Chinese, he knew Arabic, he knew some Mongolian languages, he knew some languages from Uzbekistan. But when he came here, he found that there are 12 languages spoken by people. And mind you, he had only traveled from, say, Kashmir to Kerala on one side of India, and then he went off to China. Maybe he made a dash to Delhi in between. 12 languages, he mentioned them. And the names of those languages are, among the names he mentions, there is a language called Barbarica, Yavanika, Paishachika. Paishachika was a Prakrit. Yavanika was the language spoken on the western part of outside what is today's India, and mind you, today's India is Yavanika, Paishachika. Paishachika was a Prakrit. Yavanika was the language spoken on the western part of outside what is today's India, and mind you, today's India is one map, and there are other maps previously, when maps came to be known as a method of imposing your authority on land. Yavanika was the language talk on the western side. Barbarika was the language talk from Africa. So many language speakers were there in India, and he found them to be natural inhabitants of this country. Centuries later, some 5 centuries later, Al-Baruni talks of an equally amazing number of languages. Throughout medieval times, Indians and those who watched Indians invariably mention the multiplicity of language. You might ask, because many of you are Tamil speakers here, you might ask, was it true only of North India, or was it also true of South India? My answer is, yesterday I mentioned a ancient Tamil text called Tolkapiyam. In Tolkapiyam there is a chapter which describes language, not languages, not plural, singular language. One kind of language is that which is spoken north of the Tamil speaking area. Another which is spoken to the south of the Tamil speaking area. The third which is spoken in the Tamil speaking area but not like Tamil. And the fourth language, which is the most intriguing, I don't remember the Tamil words used by, but I'll be able to, in case you feel interested, I'll be able to send those precise Tamil words. The fourth kind of language is the language that you speak to your own mind, the internal language. Those of you who have been studying A.K. Ramanujan, for instance, know that there was, he wrote a book called the Interior Landscape, the Inner Landscape, and that's straight from Tolkapiyam. The title is straight from Tolkapiyam, Aham and Puram, or Akkam and Puram. The language of the inner self, the language of the outside world. The language is in the surrounding, and the language is not just of humans, but languages of, there are so many tales and folk tales where parrots speak, lions speak, donkeys speak, horses speak, cows speak. It was not just human languages, but the language ecology of India takes in many species. When I was a child, my parents told me that I should not disturb flower plants after it becomes dark. And they explained to me in their own, not like they were not scientists, they were simple villagers. But they said then, flowers won't speak to you. That plants speak to you, they listen to you. It's a part of the folklore. Now, folklore is not science, but folklore is a fact. We surrounded by these facts. Being multilingual came very naturally to us. That one must have only one language was not the understanding of human life, human mind, human society, or a culture, or a civilization in this country. This idea that a people must have only one language, that is partly rooted in the history of nationalism. Partly rooted in the history of nationalism. Particularly in the 19th century, more specifically after the Napoleonic Wars were over, and those of you who do history know this, after this sentiment that a nation must have a language surfaced. The French Revolution had brought in great hopes for Europe. Europe started dreaming that kingship would soon be over and people's rules will come in. And Napoleon indeed came forward as a child of revolution, but soon destroyed that dream and became an autocrat of the worst kind known in history. He wanted to be like Charlemagne, but he created a new world that was a ferocious, violent world which learned to develop new war technology and new weapons. After Napoleonic Wars were over, Europe wanted to revisit the idea of forming nations which are run by people. And so movements started partly in Italy, partly in Germany. Of course, some of the princes were involved in those movements, more particularly in Germany. But in Italy, the idea of bringing all Italian people together came up. And the idea of all people together was based on the question of language. Actually, Sicily, to become part of Italy, should I allow a different language to come in? Rome, to become part of Italy, should I allow yet another language to come in? The border of Italy on the side of Switzerland, should I allow yet another language to come in? But that was not accepted. In Germany, this sentiment became even more hardened. And so the German-speaking Germany became the idea of nationalism. These two nations created in European discourse a version of nationalism which said if you are one people, you should have one language. There are other versions of nationalism. One came from the United States towards the end of the 18th century, where it was not one people, one language, but the autonomy, independence, freedom. Those were the ideas. And from Ireland, which was looking back to recovery of the Gaelic, Celtic or Celtic, but was not against multilingual being. And that's something very interesting for us to understand. We got inspired by the Irish movement a lot. The Sinn Féin movement became very impactful for us. The Sinn Féin, the Irish liberation movement, failed in 1870s. Thomas Parnell was the leader. In 1890s, the resolution of the Irish Assembly went up to the London's Parliament, but was defeated. Then finally in 1917, Ireland became an independent country. The Sinn Féin movement, the Home Rule League in India. Sinn Féin is Home Rule. The Home Rule League in India was a direct child of the Irish movement. Annie Besant was here in India. Tilak accepted the idea. Tilak and Annie Besant decided to bring an abrupt end to the Home Rule League movement. Because Tilak had just been imprisoned and released, and he was getting older. He died in next 3 or 4 years' time. Annie Besant was falling, was fading out, and Mahatma Gandhi was emerging in Indian politics. But the effect of that idea was seen in 1926. When in one of the sessions of the Congress, a resolution was adopted. The resolution was, when India becomes independent, it will be a multilingual country. I am extremely thankful to those people who passed that resolution, whoever raised their hands on that day. Extremely thankful, because the nations that plunged for one language, one nation, ended up in the middle of the 20th century as becoming fascist nations. Italy and Germany. It's history, it's fact. But those who fought against them were nations which had thought of allowing many languages to be around. We accepted the many language formula, and so when India became independent, when the constitution was to be drafted, a constitutional assembly was formulated, and in the constituent assembly, all the debates, except one, saw the question of language come up. It's okay, don't worry. It's perfectly. We are in India. We believe in multilingualism. Any noises, any voices, don't upset us. We are the Keats's Shakespeare, ability to remain amidst uncertainties. Be easy, take it easy. It's all that. I mean, there might be an emergency, we have to understand. And emergencies come unexpected. There is no more prior notice. In the Constituent Assembly, debates on many issues. Except for the first meeting, which was the welcoming of the members, in every meeting the language issue came up, but in the conclusion, it saw a very different form. All the debates that got concluded became articles in the Constitution. The debates which could not be conclusively brought to an end became the schedules of the Constitution. Language is in the schedule of the Constitution. The 8th schedule of the Constitution is the language schedule of the Constitution. And what did it say? On the 26th of November 1950, when the Constitution was ready, 1949, or 26th January 1950, when the Constitution was enacted by we the people of India, it said we will have 14 languages as the scheduled languages. Please don't confuse between scheduled languages and scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Scheduled languages are the privileged languages, not non-privileged languages. The 8th schedule of the Constitution is the schedule of languages. It had 14 languages listed, and at present there are 22 languages listed in the schedule. This Constitution truly reflects the multilingual spirit of our country and the multilingual history of our country. And therefore is one of the greatest constitutions that humans have seen. Soon after independence, the challenges were many. I mean, supposing you are the Prime Minister or Home Minister or whoever you want to be, there are many, because the partition had taken place. There was poverty, there was deficiency of currency, villages had to be rebuilt. There are many literacy levels were at 15 or 20%, many challenges. But despite all those challenges, Jawaharlal Nehru decided to pay attention to multilingualism on priority, and from 1952 onwards, when a language movement sprung up in Telangana and also in Punjab, the government spent about 10 years creating India as a federation. See, the Constitution described India as a union of states. What is India? The Constitution has given a very clear answer. It is a union of states. India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. That's how the Constitution begins. This union of states was allowed to manifest itself in terms of linguistic states. Telugu, Telangana, Punjabi, Punjab, Gujarati, Gujarat, and Kannada language, and so on. I am trying to convey to you that those who fought for our independence were inspired by the ideas of non-monolingual nations, Gujarat, and Kannada language, and so on. I am trying to convey to you that those who fought for our independence were inspired by the ideas of non-monolingual nations. They were enthusiastic about allowing many languages to survive. They in fact gave formal shape, and they gave a structural form to this dream of having language diversity. However, something changed after 1970. I was a student in 1960s, a college-going student, and I had seen the 1961 census showing 1,652 mother tongues. I was absolutely thrilled. I mean, I was actually imagining if I had to do 1,652 degrees in so many languages, I will get a very long life, multiplied by 3 years for every degree. 10 years later, 1971 census took place. You see, the census data for all other things, as to how many cows there are in the country, how many wells there are, how many, that comes by, I mean, when I said cows, some of you laughed, but I must share with you that the first time the census happened in India was because of Lord Mayo. You must have heard this name. This Mayo school in Ajmer, named after him. He came from Cumberland. He was in the Lord in the British Parliament. Mayo came here in 1868 and decided that India should have regular census every 10 years. The ground rules for the Indian census were laid by Lord Mayo in 1871. The first census took place. So I am now going to 1961, 90 years later. The mother tongues were listed, and in the first census of Mayo, the cattle folk were counted. Cows and buffaloes were counted because Indian families claimed that they were persons. They were individuals. I wish in our constitution where it is said that every person is a citizen of India. Instead of that sentence, if it had been every being is a citizen of India, we could have moved to a much better form of democracy. Counting all animals, our dogs, our cats, our buffaloes, they have, only some donkeys have gone to the parliament. Anyway. Since 71, the census data for donkeys, cats, dogs, whales, cycles, motorbikes comes out very quickly because it is only numerical assortment. But the language data takes some time because what people claim as language needs to be verified, and it takes 5 or 6 years before that verification is carried out. Between 1971 and completion of the verification, the Bangladesh war took place. Now all of you know that Bangladesh became an independent country because of clash of languages, Bangla and Urdu. And Bangladesh, what is Bangladesh now, wanted Bangla to be given equal status and so on. Since that had happened, the Indian government became very nervous about displaying language diversity. And it introduced a cutoff point. It introduced a condition that only if more than 10,000 persons speak a language, it shall be recognized as language in the census, not otherwise. And as a result, the 1971 census had only 109 languages. 1652 to 109 in 10 years' time. That's more than 1540 or 50 languages were knocked out of the census. People had claimed them as their languages, as their mother tongues, but not recognized. Out of 109, the 109th was most interesting of 1970. It read all others. So one immediately knows that there are so many other languages, but the government does not recognize them as being there. Multilingualism, language diversity started receding in government records from 1970s. And today, when you look at the government data, you notice that they recognize only 121 or 122. Today there are 22 languages which are scheduled languages. I can rattle off the names, but you don't need me to do that. 22 scheduled languages and about 100 non-scheduled languages. In the last census, as I mentioned yesterday, 1369 mother tongues came up, but they were all clamped, compressed, packed into 122 boxes. Some very ridiculous social engineering happens because of that. I'll give you one example. Hindi. Hindi is claimed as being spoken by 42% of Indian citizens. Sorry, 39% of Indian citizens. But in the box of Hindi, in 2011 census, which the data for which came out in 2018, and in 2018 the possibility of data management was much greater in comparison to 2011. In the box of Hindi, under the caption of Hindi, they had put a language called Bhojpuri, which was claimed by 5 crore 3 lakh persons as their mother tongue. It was denied independent existence. But you will say, of course, Bhojpuri sounds like Hindi. Let it sound like Hindi, it's all right. It has its independent cinema, independent music, independent theatre, and it is Bhojpuri is today the world's fastest growing language. At the top, its growth is faster. After 30 or 40 years, Bhojpuri will be larger than Hindi perhaps, I don't know. They put all the languages of Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan in the box of Hindi. Rajasthan has 44 languages, independent languages. But they were all described as Hindi. But the most comic was the case of Pauri. Now, Pauri is a language partly spoken in Maharashtra, partly in Madhya Pradesh. But because a part of Pauri speakers are in Madhya Pradesh, and some officers, some Sahib had said that all Madhya Pradesh languages must be shown as Hindi, they showed Pauri as part of Hindi. However, I worked with the Pauri persons. I ran a magazine in Pauri language for many years, and I know that the Pauri speakers do not understand Hindi. Pauri and Hindi are mutually not easily intelligible. There's something shared. The census method, the enumeration, the government records are trying to show Indian languages in less profusion than they actually are. Now, the period which I mentioned, where language diversity is forced to shrink, is also the period when the plant and animal diversity was seen shrinking. Now, what is at the source of these two apparently unrelated shrinkages? that is something that we need to understand, and I shall be speaking about it tomorrow. Why language diversity is going down. That it is going down is very clear. But why? What is the basic reason? And it's not only blaming the government. That is enough to understand something deeper is happening to the human mind, human brain, human societies. I will mention very briefly just 2 or 3 factors, but I'll elaborate on that question, the question of silence, if I may say so. Why aphasia is being imposed on us? Why we are being pushed into silence? Why humans are departing from language? That's a very big question for all of us to think about, to ponder. But 2 or 3 factors I'll mention. One is, of course, the rise of artificial memory, which has threatened the possibility of perception of time, particularly the past tense, and its reflection, the future tense, and thus threatening existence of human languages. The other, which I learned from a professor of reading. Reading is the subject, not reading, not the University of Reading. Reading, professor of reading in Britain, who worked on children who suffered from dyslexia, that is language, discomfort. I'll say language. I will not say disability, but not children who suffered from an uneasy relationship with language, with speech and writing. And Mary Ann Wolf is the name. She came up with the observation that something in the brain, something in the Broca's lobe, or whichever part of the brain manages language, has shifted humans into a fatigue for writing and reading. And students might be experiencing it, professors might be experiencing it even more. When I was a student, my professors expected me to read about 40 or 45 books in a semester. When I became a professor, I started expecting my students to read about 22 books in a semester. My daughter is a professor and she expects her students to read about 3 books in a semester. Reading and writing are disappearing. Ability to write and ability to decipher scripts, they are departing from the human station. And it is because of some evolution in the brain. That is what I understand from that book. There is a corollary to that, and that is the ability to perceive the world through visual image, visual signals is increasing. And possibly a future may come when you and I shall not be speaking. You and I shall be exchanging signals. I mean, you say my birthday, and I send that signal to you. Humans who are very actively looking at the possibility of moving out of the earth, away from the earth, and maybe thinking of a final colonization of the universe, many planets, also tend to think that this voice which the air carries, that's not medium sufficient to communicate, and therefore perhaps digits which are not earthbound by physical, not ruled by the physical laws, earthbound physical laws, and can escape our earth, they are slowly rapidly replacing the voice-based speech. Perhaps after having created language as a weapon, as a tool, as a socializing method, as a great expression for creativity over the last 70,000 years, perhaps we decided that we should drop that tool, just as people in the past, Paleolithic people, know their stone tools that drop and develop new tools. Perhaps we should, perhaps humans tacitly, but universally seem to have agreed that we shall go beyond language into a zone of silence, in interterrestrial, where our voice and our speech won't manage to convey anything. It's a frightening thought for me. There is a Bangla song, Sukumar, Awak Prithvi Awak. I don't know if any Bengali speaker. It's a great song. Awak Prithvi to convey anything. It's a frightening thought for me. There is a Bangla song, Sukumar, Awak Prithvi Awak. I don't know if any Bengali speaker. It's a great song. Awak Prithvi Awak. Sukant. The speechless world, the world without voice, Nirbhashit Vishwa. An existence where the word, the perennial river of meaning, has dried and the word has fallen off as a shukla kashta, as a dried skin of a dead animal. That's where we are going. And therefore the question of language is also the question of understanding the new silence overpowering us, as distinct from the silence that Shakespeare, which I mentioned earlier, the rest is silence. Potent silence, creative silence, which will create many storms, many words, many sentences. We're moving into another order of silence, which won't be human, which will be perhaps the silence that the Homo Deus understand, or the animal that will be partly chips and partly bones will understand. So that animal won't be either chips. By chips I don't mean potato chips, I mean memory chips. That animal won't be memory chip nor a living bone. Language in India, language diversity in India, explicitly presents to us a possibility of society and life and culture which could generate, if we understood what that diversity is, which could generate a critique of new scientific technological rigor that's threatening human beings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Devy, for a very thought-provoking lecture.
And very depressing lecture.
We have some time for question and answers, so if the volunteers can help.
Yes. Yes. Whoever can grab the mic will ask the first question.
I just want to ask, as you were saying, nationalism previously was based on monolingual thing. Not noticing that nationalism from monolingual, it has come to region thing, that is which is threatening our country.
Subnationalism.
Not actually, primary has become as a primary.
Subnationalism is a saving feature, saving grace for us. That we are Tamil speaking, Kannada speaking, Gujarati speaking, Odia speaking, that keeps the union of states as a union of states without making it a singular. But you're right, nationalism has moved to, the idea of nationalism has moved to higher grade cruelty and suppression. Yes, yes. I mean, not just one language, one people. Now it is saying, and we are in 2023. In 1923, a text was written. I will not mention the name of the writer or name of the text. You find out for yourself. But it was very close to a 1924 text, just with a gap of a few months. The 1924 text was written in Germany by a man called Adolf Hitler. It was called Mein Kampf. 1923 text was written in Maharashtra under a pseudonym, a false name. And but I'll not mention the name of the writer and name of the text. But that text said that your Pitru Bhumi has to be your Punya Bhumi, which means the land where you belong must also be the land where your religion was born. Then alone you are trustworthy citizen. Otherwise, you are a doubtful citizen, a seconded citizen. Nationalism has come to that point. Not just one language, but one language, one spiritual philosophy, one religious, and that's terrible. So, the 20th century fascism was at least one language, one nation. Now it is one language, one nation, one God, and with more frightening weaponry. And it's not happening just here; it's happening in many parts of the country. That's even more frightening.
How do you forecast, sir?
To counter it by promoting diversity, praising diversity, talk about diversity, live diversity. To go beyond your own religion, go beyond your own language, go beyond your own nation. To remind, it can be countered by reminding ourselves that we are humans first. And all of the identities are tags that were attached to us later, subsequently. But thank you for that question. I'll go to other questions.
Can you please let the students ask questions first, if you don't mind? Thank you.
Good evening, sir. I am a student from journalism, and I had a question. Like, you were speaking that while we were drafting our constitution, the makers of our constitution focused on making it India a multilingual country. They gave 14 languages in the initial schedule, and at the same time, a country just next to India, which had gained independence just the next year, Sri Lanka, we saw that in there they were focusing on only one language. And that ended up creating years of civil war. So, sir, what do you think would happen in a country like India, which is so vast, so diverse, if only a single language would have been imposed, rather than creating it multilingual?
Thank you. I share your fears, but I do not share the reasons for your fears. We provided not just one reason, but several reasons. Now we got a civil code that might also become another reason. I think we are fine with what we have done with languages in this country. And I mentioned Sintis who did not know English at that time, and I love them. I love them. Maybe most of us don't speak any language fully correctly, but Panini would not have scolded us on that, as I mentioned. The fact that, I can bet anything with you. I mean, if we were to do languages of your moms, a survey of languages that mothers speak, 2 or 3 languages they speak. Everybody's mother knows more than 2 or 3 languages. There may be a monolingual mother, and that's not her fault. Why do we speak of the mother tongue? We should have mother tongues. I share your fears, and I hope we don't go for a civil war. I do not like the idea of war at all. Humans are born for creative expression. They call themselves Homo sapien, intelligent animal, and warring is not any testimony to intelligence. Avoiding wars, ability to avoid conflict, absorb conflict, transform into higher level of civilization is what reflects intelligence. If any civil war possibility arises, do send a mail to me. You and I will come together and fight against that idea. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, sir. Firstly, I'm really sorry for being late. Since I'm the CR of my class, it took me some time to come here. I'm the girl who asked you the question yesterday about the Sanskrit and many different questions. So
I said some very nice things about you. I won't tell you what nice things I said.
I'll watch that as a replay whenever it's published. I'm really glad the other person asked the question about how imposing one single language can create a lot of distractions and administrative problems. So I just asked a similar question but with a different perspective to it. When the drafting commission were deciding what the national language of India would be, they were also deliberating about something called Hindustani. And it was a recommendation by Gandhi and the entire drafting committee as a whole. And they were almost willing to make it the national language till the time it got Sanskritized. And going back to your lecture yesterday, Sanskrit was brought to India. And that's what you said. And I don't really have particular knowledge about how it came, and that's why I asked you the resources and the sources for the same. But since it was not recognized, it's still not recognized as a language as a whole, because it was an amalgamation of different languages, which was suggested to be the national language. Do you think it could have been a possibility if it were not to be Sanskritized, if it were not changed, the fabric was not changed? What are your perceptions to it? How could the future be? That's all. Thank you.
Gandhi did speak of Hindustani with great enthusiasm. And that enthusiasm was focused to the workers who came together in the freedom fight. Because here people from Tamil speaking area, there was somebody from Bihar, somebody from Punjab. And for them to think alike, be on the same page, Hindustani was necessary. But you know that Gandhi wrote in Gujarati. All the important things that Gandhi had to write, he wrote in Gujarati. And then he also wrote in English. All the telegrams, Gandhi was a great devotee of sending telegrams. They are in English. Why did Gandhi not send telegrams in Gujarati? I mean, today we see some leader goes outside India, speaks Hindi, whereas English conversation there would be more effective, more practical. But Gandhi was a cultural pragmatist. When it is necessary to write in Gujarati, he wrote in Gujarati. When necessary, he wrote in English. He advocated Hindustani as a language of unity, not as a language of union. The two are different. Besides, Gandhi was alive when the constitution was being drafted. When the 8th schedule of the constitution got formulated, Gandhi did not go on hunger strike, fasting to death. Gandhi accepted that constitution as a legitimate constitution worked out by people who were assigned the role of governance. Gandhi had moved out of, he was not a member of the Constituent Assembly, but, and this is very important, when the 8th schedule had to be formed, a subcommittee worked, and it had that for deciding which languages should be included. One member of that subcommittee was Hansa Mehta. She was a great Gandhian. There was K.T. Mehta. He was a great Gandhian. Gandhi's followers sat in the Constituent Assembly and accepted the 8th schedule. And Gandhi would have loved that. I mean, he did accept it, but he would have loved that, seeing it come in practice in the form of linguistic states in India, because Gandhi was fond of many languages. He could actually either put his signature in 14 languages and speak 7 or 8 languages. The fact that 14 languages alone got included in the 8th schedule is the shadow of Gandhi speaking to the Constituent Assembly. And those 14 states, while I feel terrible that only 14 were put in the 8th schedule, they should have put all the languages that George Grierson had counted 100 years before my time in the first linguistic survey of India. He had counted 189 languages, 554 dialects. All of them should have been in the, why to have scheduled and non-scheduled language? Gandhi was a great student of languages. And Gandhi's idea of language was enriched by his profound understanding of silence, which was the true way of understanding language. You see, when you speak a sentence, you write a sentence, the blank between the words is what gives meaning to the words. Imagine they all come crammed as a single train or something like that. It makes no sense. Gandhi understood the importance of language as couched in silence. He accepted the 8th schedule. His own followers, devotees, were part of the committee that formulated that schedule. And I think, you see, when you speak a sentence, you write a sentence, the blank between the words is what gives meaning to the words. Imagine they all come crammed as a single train or something like that. It makes no sense. Gandhi understood the importance of language as couched in silence. He accepted the 8th schedule. His own followers, devotees, were part of the committee that formulated that schedule. And I think to imagine that Gandhi perhaps would have proposed Hindustani as the national language, I doubt. India does not have a national language till today. There is a language for administration. Rajya Bhasha. Hindi is Rajya Bhasha, not Rashtra Bhasha. And I'm happy it's a Rajya Bhasha. Let every language be Rajya Bhasha. Let India not have Rashtra Bhasha. The day India accepts one language as the Bhasha of the Rashtra, India is finished. Take my words. And please don't send an email on that to me because I won't be able to do anything. With the war, we can do something. Thank you. But your Prakrut and Sanskrit, that's very the Prakrut part of India is much larger than the Sanskrit part, geographically, sociologically. That is overlooked. The 8th schedule does not take that into account. Pali is still not made a scheduled language in India, while that is the language of Buddha's philosophy and Mahavir's philosophy, and language on which Marathi, Gujarati, Oriya, so many languages are based. So that's a bit of an injustice. The day Pali becomes a scheduled language along with the Sanskrit language, I think we will have language equality and language justice in this country. For that you can wage a struggle. You can use Mahatma Gandhi's name for promoting Pali because Gandhi promoted study of Pali. This I must share with students even if there is long answer. Pali had practically disappeared from India because Buddhism was persecuted. But at the beginning of the end of the 19th century, beginning in 20th century, a very great person called Dharmanand Kosambi, D.D. Kosambi's father, he traveled, great poverty, great difficulties, had no money, he walked hundreds of miles, went all the way to Banaras, then to Nepal, he could not find any politics, then he went to Sri Lanka, could not find a very great, then he went all the way to Harvard, picked up Pali. He brought Pali back to India. He revived Pali. He is the man who brought Marxism to India. And he is the person who introduced Buddhism to Ambedkar. We need to include Pali into, and towards the last days of his life, he went to Gandhi's Vardha ashram. He died there. So Gandhi's connection with Pali is great.
Hello sir, thank you for your lecture. My question to you is, what qualifies a language to be called a language, and how is it different from a dialect?
Not a script. A language does not have to have a script in order to be a language. Example. A great language in the world does not have a script of its own till today. Still it's a great language. The name of that language is English. English is using Roman script. They, for the Bible, the king set up a committee, the king's, authorized version to translate. The British kings or queens could have easily set up a committee to create a script for the English language. They never did so. Because they understood that script does not make a language a language. What makes a language is peculiar, own, consistent grammar, cohesive grammar. So spoken languages, after all, if we're saying that for the last 70,000 years people have been speaking, what they're speaking were languages. But writing came into human life just about 7,000 years ago. So what about the first 63,000 years prior to writing came in? Were they not languages? Obviously they were languages. We feel that language is synonymous with writing because for India, a little earlier in Europe, printing came into our life. And so we saw whatever is printed is a book. Books were seen as synonymous with scriptures. They acquired scriptural value, they acquired authority. And therefore, the writer of a book is called an author. The word author is somebody who writes terrible stuff which becomes authority. I am often described as an author also. Terrible. Printing brought in this idea that if you are writing, if you are printing, then that is language. In fact, in the 8th schedule, languages were included on the basis if they had printed literature in them or not. Look at what happened. The Billy was spoken by 1 crore 20 lakh persons at that time. It did not get included in the 8th schedule. Similarly, Gondi remained excluded. Santali got included much later. Santali was the language for which Rabindranath Tagore had great praises. Not in the 8th schedule until very recently. Mundari language, not in the 8th schedule. The Bhils, the Mundas, the Gonds and the Santals have been in India for the oldest known time. They were the makers of our languages. But because of that, writing is language, is like saying, I don't have it, my jacket, my coat and my trousers are the person. Writing is a photograph of language. It is shorn of sound, voice, and language is voice-based speech. Writing has no speech. When we read writing, we fake speech. We create intonation as if somebody is speaking, but it sounds very artificial. You know that nobody speaks like that the way you read. Language needs two persons to speak it. The day the second person dies, the language dies. I seen in Sikkim, when I studied that language, only 4 were speaking. In the last 10 years, 3 of them are dead, and therefore that language is gone. That single person is speaking to birds, stars, speaking to herself. That's no language. Language needs a community and sound and grammar. That makes a language a language.
Very much, Professor Devy. I'm afraid we're out of time.
I'm afraid we're out of time. We can ask him more questions.
Samira, may I suggest in all politeness, let at least the questions be asked. I won't answer them. That will be a time saver. Let me hear the questions. In today's Telegraph, I written an article on the importance of asking questions in educational institutions. So I cannot deny myself that privilege. Just ask the questions, I won't answer. Maybe tomorrow I will take them.
Am I audible enough?
Yes. But with the mic will be more audible, I can hear you.
Hello, sir. So my question goes to the sort of the future of the visual communication, because you said someday I will say happy birthday and the other person will show thumbs up. But even though if we trace the history of visual communication, we have seen how it also has a diversity of its own. Like, for example, in Abhinaya Darpan, this is also tying a hair and this is also tying a hair. Plus, when we are talking about sign languages, where does the narrative of the sign language itself come, which tries to bridge the sound and the person who can hear a sound and the person who cannot hear a sound?
Sign languages are not a translation of sound languages. Sign languages are autonomous. Sign languages are made by people who are shown off, who are different from sound, perception of sound, or either perception of sound or ability to make sounds. But I'll answer that. I'll begin with tomorrow's lecture. I'll begin with sign language and silence and the visual culture.
Thank you, sir.
Hi sir, great lecture. So as you reflected the fact that the language diversity is declining, so my question is about is there any upcoming language is there any new origin of a language? And one more thing which you can go for tomorrow, it's about how exactly a language origins, what are the mechanisms and how it evolves. So that was my question.
Just a moment. Are there any professors here? Mount Carmel. When does your semester end? When does your semester? Because you are asking for a semester-long lecture. But read Wittgenstein, either Wittgenstein or Saussure, and you will get answers to your questions. But if you promise to be around tomorrow, I'll answer that question at the end of my lecture tomorrow. And there's a language called Tally which is emerging, which is accounting language, and it will become overpowering very soon.
Quick question, sir.
When Shankar started from Kerala and reached up to mountains, so there must be, we imagine that there must be a connecting language, Sampark Bhasha. So what could be that kind of Sampark Bhasha for today's India? I was just wondering.
Dubhashits, bilinguals on the borders, allowing transgression. That is, we debated whether it's Hindi or English, but quite frankly, English won't succeed. Quite frankly, Hindi won't succeed. Indians are extremely capricious as far as defeating any thought is concerned. We will live as multilinguals. And one language which entire India understands is currency.
Am I audible now? Okay. You talked about language and metaphysics and the connection between the two. I had made a desktop survey of the Gondi dictionary and the English dictionary, and I found that my English dictionary had 32,000 words, while the Gondi dictionary had just about 3,500 words. And then I did a further small survey, which showed that the percentage of adjectives and adverbs in the Gondi dictionary was significantly lesser than those in the English dictionary. Do you see any connection between tribal languages like Gondi and the whole concept of the self?
Like I have many limbs, but if some domains are not in use, they drop off. If the Gondis are allowed space, not in education, not in science, and not in banking, not in markets, but only rituals, only talking about forest, and obviously the other domains. If they have a greater sense of self-assertion, if their importance increases, the domains of languages that they have dropped off will come back. I mean, when we write scientific books in Marathi, we really Jayant Narlikar, excellent physicist, but physics man. But writing in Marathi, he had to struggle. He has the knowledge. He knows Marathi language. But Marathi has not produced books on physics in the past. So it's domains of language disappear for people whose dominance in the society has gone down. That's where I see it. But I'll discuss this with you at greater length in time.
Hello, sir. This is in response to one of your answers that you gave just now. You explained to us what makes a language, but could you clarify the distinction between a dialect and a language? Because I think that's a little puzzling.
That word lexical means speech. Ability to people who have ability to speak their own lexis and some different, slightly related or slightly unrelated lexis. Those lucky people are described as speaking dialect. A dialect brings new words into a settled language. A language is like the banks of a river. Dialects are like the flowing water. Or, if you think of the Big Bang, not the Big Bang, Big Bang. When the earth is about to settle, see the loose matter on the periphery, which is flying, is dialects. When it settles, it becomes language. Dialect is the youthful, energetic, new expression. Language is the tired, old, retired, PF earning word fellows.
Thank you. Thank you, audience. We hope to see all of you again tomorrow. 2 quick announcements for students who want participation certificates.